You know how to configure foundation objects, you can understand event reasons, you can create business rules, you can configure workflows. You can even pass your SAP SuccessFactors Employee Central certification. But none of that automatically makes you good at designing Employee Central architecture. And this is where I see many implementations struggle. Because certification teaches you how Employee Central works. But on a real transformation, someone has to answer a much bigger question: how should Employee Central fit into the entire enterprise? Where should employee data originate? Which system owns positions? Where should cost centers come from? What happens when payroll remains in SAP? Which integrations are necessary? What happens when 10 different applications all want the same employee data? And most importantly, who owns what? Today, I'm going to walk through the employee central architecture concepts that I believe every senior SuccessFactors consultant should understand, but that you may never fully learn from certification alone. Here's the first distinction: configuration answers. How do I configure this? Architecture answers: should I configure this here at all? That difference is huge. Imagine the business says, we need department in Employee Central. A configuration focused consultant may immediately start thinking about foundation objects, associations, fields, permissions, imports. But an architect starts somewhere else. They ask, who owns department? Is Employee Central the master? Is it coming from S/4 HANA? Is it coming from it? Does another operational system own it? Which applications consume it? What happens when the department changes? Does that change need to reach payroll, identity management, finance, reporting, learning, recruiting? Suddenly, you're no longer discussing a field. You're discussing enterprise architecture. If you remember only one thing from this video, remember this. Every major data object needs a clearly defined system of record. Employee Central might be your HR system of record, but that doesn't automatically mean Employee Central owns everything. Take cost center. In many organizations, finance owns the cost center hierarchy. That might originate in SAP S4 HANA. So instead of creating cost centers manually inside Employee Central, the architecture might look something like this: S4 HANA to integration layer and integration layer to Employee Central. Now consider employee information. Employee Central may be the authoritative source. So the direction changes: Employee Central to integration layer to payroll. Already you have two different master data directions. And this is why architecture diagrams matter, because without them, organizations start creating duplicate ownership. HR changes something in Employee Central. Finance changes the same thing somewhere else. Payroll has another value. And suddenly everyone asks, why doesn't the data match? The integration isn't necessarily the problem. The ownership model I is the problem. When I review an Employee Central implementation, I mentally break the architecture into 7 layers. Layer 1: User Experience. What does the employee, manager, HR administrator, or executive interact with? This could include SuccessFactors homepage, people profile, org chart, mobile, Joule, manager self-service, and employee self-service, but don't start architecture here. This is simply what the user sees. Layer 2: Business Process. Now ask, what HR processes actually happen? Hire, rehire, promotion, transfer, termination, global assignment, concurrent employment, position change, compensation change, leave, return from leave. And here's the important part: do not design fields before understanding these processes. A field is rarely isolated, it participates in a business process. Layer 3: Employee Central Data Model. Now you get into the familiar Employee Central world: legal entity, business unit, division, department, location, job classification, pay grade, position, job information, employment information, compensation information, personal information, foundation objects, MDF objects, effective dated objects. This is where most certification training becomes extremely useful. But the architecture doesn't stop here. Therefore, business logic now asks, what should the system automatically determine? Maybe location determines time zone, job classification determines pay grade, employee group determines workflow, country determines certain mandatory fields, transfer determines event reason, position determines job classification, business rules live here, workflows live here, derivations live here, validations live here. And this is an area where over engineering becomes dangerous. I see implementations with hundreds and hundreds of rules. And eventually, nobody understands why a field changed. A good architecture doesn't just automate, it creates explainable automation. Layer 5: Now Employee Central has to talk to the enterprise. Payroll. S4 HANA, identity systems, Active Directory, benefits, time systems, finance, learning, recruiting, third party applications, data warehouses, reporting platforms, and possibly dozens of regional applications. The question isn't, can we integrate it? Almost everything can be integrated somehow. The better question is, what is the cleanest and most governable integration pattern? Layer 6. Analytics and data consumption. Once Employee Central becomes your HR core, everyone wants the data. Executives, finance, payroll, workforce planning, data teams, compliance, audit, HR analytics. The mistake is allowing every team to independently pull whatever clip from Employee Central. That creates uncontrolled dependencies. A mature architecture asks, what is operational reporting? What is enterprise analytics? What data should remain in success factors? What should move into an enterprise data platform? How frequently does it need to move? And who is allowed to consume it? Layer 7, security and governance. And this is perhaps the least glamorous, but one of the most important layers. Role based permissions, target populations, integration user permissions, sensitive personal data, field level access, administrative permissions, API access, audit requirements, retention, data privacy. Security architecture isn't something you add at the end. It should influence the design from the beginning. Here's a mistake I see surprisingly often. A company is implementing Employee Central, and someone says, Employee Central is our new HR system, so everything should originate there. Not necessarily. Think about a large enterprise. Cost centers may belong to finance, projects may belong to S4, operational positions may sometimes originate from operational systems. Identity data may be generated by identity management platforms. Payroll results obviously belong in payroll. Learning completions may belong in LMS. Recruiting information may originate in recruiting. Employee Central doesn't need to own everything, it needs to own the right things. Architecture is about defining those boundaries. Let's talk about position management. Certification may teach you how positions work, but real implementations ask much harder questions. Where are positions created? Employee Central, S4 HANA, a workforce planning system, a budgeting application, an operational workforce system? Who approves new headcount? HR, finance, operations? What happens when the manager position becomes vacant? What happens to the reporting hierarchy? Can a position exist without an incumbent? Can one employee occupy multiple positions? How are temporary assignments handled? How does the position hierarchy interact with the organization hierarchy? And perhaps most importantly, which system has the authority to change the position? This isn't a configuration question, it's an operating model decision. Organization structure. This one causes enormous confusion. Your company might have legal entity, business unit, division, department, but your reporting relationship could be driven by positions. And your cost allocation could follow cost centers. And your operational structure might follow something completely different. These are not necessarily the same hierarchy. Imagine employee to position and position to manage a position, but also employee to department and department to division and division to business unit, and employee to cost center and cost center to finance hierarchy. Those structures can overlap, but they serve different purposes. One of the biggest architecture mistakes is trying to force all of them into one universal hierarchy. Enterprise organizations rarely work that way. Now let's talk about integrations. This is where many HR transformations become unnecessarily complicated. Imagine Employee Central in the middle, connected directly to payroll, benefits, identity management, finance, data warehouse, time, S4, learning, third party systems, and every application builds its own custom point to point connection. Initially, it looks fast. 5 years later, the landscape looks like spaghetti. Every employee central change breaks three integrations. Every integration has different mappings, different error handling, different schedules, different ownership, different logging. That's not automation, that's technical debt. A stronger architecture asks whether integrations can follow governed patterns through services such as an enterprise integration layer. Instead of thinking system A connects to system B, think how does HR master data move through the enterprise? That mindset change is important. Let's take something that sounds simple, hiring an employee. The recruiter completes the hiring process, the employee enters onboarding. The new hire arrives in Employee Central. Sounds finished. But from an architecture perspective, the process may have just started. Employee Central creates the worker record. Then employee data goes to payroll. Employee data goes to identity management. Identity creates the network account. Information goes to Active Directory. Security groups may be assigned. Data goes to benefits. Data may go to a time system. Data may go to S4. Organizational information may go to downstream applications. The manager relationship may determine approval somewhere else. Suddenly, one hire transaction creates perhaps 10 downstream consequences. So, architecture asks what happens if payroll replication fails? Should identity creation continue? Which system retries? Who owns the error? How will HR know? What happens if the employee's start date changes? Will every downstream system receive the correction? This is what architecture is really about. Here's another area certification teaches, but architecture makes much more complicated. Effective dating. Employee Central is fundamentally designed around effective dated HR information. Let's say today is June 1st and I enter a promotion effective July 1st. Employee Central understands that future change. But does your downstream payroll system, does your identity platform, does your third party application? What happens if the July promotion is corrected on June 15th? What happens if someone inserts another change effective June 20th? Architecture must define how downstream systems consume current data, future data, historical corrections, retroactive changes, deleted records, effective sequences. Without this design, integrations can technically work while still producing incorrect business outcomes. Another misconception. Moving to success factors does not automatically mean every HR process immediately moves to the cloud. Many enterprises operate hybrid landscapes. For example, Employee Central may become the HR system of record, but payroll might remain in SAP, time might remain somewhere else. Finance may continue in S4. Legacy HR applications may still need employee information. This creates what SAP describes as hybrid deployment models. And that's not necessarily bad architecture. Hybrid becomes bad when responsibilities are unclear. If Employee Central owns employee job information, say that clearly. If S4 owns cost center, say that clearly. If payroll owns payroll results, say that clearly. Good architecture is not about eliminating systems, it's about eliminating ambiguity between systems. If I join an Employee Central project, one of the first things I want to see is a simple architecture diagram, not a 100-page document, one diagram. At the center, SAP SuccessFactors Employee Central, around it, recruiting, onboarding, payroll, S4 HANA, identity, time, benefits, learning, analytics, third party systems. And every arrow should answer four questions. 1. What data moves? Employee, organization, position, cost center, compensation. 2. Which direction? Inbound, outbound, bidirectional. 3. Who owns the data? Employee Central. S4. Third party platform. 4. How quickly? Real time, near real time, scheduled batch, daily, weekly. If you can't answer those four questions for an interface, you're probably not ready to build it. Here's another tool I recommend. Create a simple table. Object system of record consumer employee central payroll, identity, analytics position employee central payroll, finance cost center. S4 HANA employee central job classification, employee central payroll, payroll result, payroll reporting, user account, identity platform, enterprise applications. Your architecture may look completely different. That's fine. The important thing is that ownership is explicit. Because when ownership is unclear, integrations become synchronization battles. Let me give you 7 architecture mistakes I see repeatedly. Mistake 1, starting configuration before defining ownership. Mistake 2, recreating legacy system complexity inside Employee Central. Cloud transformation should simplify, not relocate complexity. Mistake 3, building too many point to point integrations. Mistake 4, allowing multiple systems to maintain the same information. Mistake 5, treating position management purely as configuration. It's often an enterprise operating model decision. Mistake 6, ignoring effective dating in downstream integrations. Mistake 7, and perhaps the biggest, designing Employee Central in isolation. Employee Central does not live in isolation, it lives inside an enterprise ecosystem. Configurator versus architect. This is where consultants can really differentiate themselves. A configurator says, I know how to create this business rule. A strong consultant asks, why does this rule exist? A configurator says, I can add this custom field. A strong consultant asks, which business process needs this information? A configurator says, we can build an integration. An architect asks, should this integration exist? A configurator asks, how do we replicate the data? An architect asks, which system should own the data? That shift in thinking can completely change your career. So, if you've completed your Employee Central certification, congratulations. But don't stop there. Start learning these five things. Number one, enterprise HR architecture. Understand how HR technology connects across the enterprise. Number two, integration architecture, learn APIs. OData, integration center. Middleware concepts, event driven integration, error handling, monitoring. Number three, data architecture, understand master data ownership, effective dating, historical dating, future dated transactions, data quality. Number four, business process design. Don't just learn system functionality, understand hire to retire, recruit to hire, transfer, promotion, global mobility, termination, rehire. Number five, enterprise decision making. Learn how HR, finance, IT, payroll, and operations look at the same employee information differently. That's where architecture gets interesting. The next time someone asks, how should we configure Employee Central? Don't immediately open Manage Business Configuration. Start with this question: what role should Employee Central play in our enterprise architecture? Once you answer that, configuration becomes much easier because you know what Employee Central owns, what it doesn't own, what data comes in, what data goes out, which business processes begin there, which processes continue somewhere else, and how the entire landscape fits together. Certification can make you a certified consultant, but architecture thinking is what can turn you into a trusted advisor. And in my experience, the most valuable success factors consultant audits aren't necessarily the people who know the most configuration screens. They're the people who can look at a complicated HR landscape, understand the business problem, simplify it, and design something that can still work 5 years from now. So here's my question for you. What is the hardest employee central architecture decision you've encountered on a project? Was it position management, payroll integration, system of record, organizational structure, or integration complexity? Put it in the comments. I'll see you in the next video.